Today, we're diving deep into the reign of His Majesty King Jigme Khesar Namgyel Wangchuck.
Okay.
He is the fifth Truk Yelpo, and that means Dragon King of Bhutan.
Interesting.
We've got some great material here that really digs into his leadership style.
Okay.
And what we're aiming for is to sort of break down the essential elements that have shaped his land. Really impactful and, I think, kind of unique approach to being king.
Yeah, I think when we look at King Jigme Khesar, we're seeing more than just someone who inherited a throne.
Yeah.
We're seeing a leader who's been able to deal with some really big changes while still staying true to the core values of his nation.
That's right.
One thing that really stands out is how he took the lead in Bhutan's transition to a constitutional democracy back in 2008.
Yeah, and that wasn't some kind of like forced thing.
No, it was a very deliberate move.
Yeah, it was his choice.
Yeah, and you'd think that a king might want to hold on to power in the traditional way.
Right.
But this document we're looking at, it suggests that he actually really pushed for this shift toward democracy.
So what was the thinking behind that? Do we know?
Well, it seems like he saw it as a way to create a society that was more resilient and where people had a real say in how things were run.
Interesting.
The focus was on giving the people of Bhutan more power while making sure that the change happened smoothly and that they stayed unified.
Yeah.
And all of this was very much rooted in their cultural values.
So.
It wasn't about him giving up responsibility,
Right.
but more about sharing it so that the nation would be stronger in the long run.
That's a really fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah.
And it definitely seems like this connection that he has with his people is a big part of what makes his leadership so unique. The document highlights how he's constantly out there engaging with citizens all over Bhutan, like really trying to understand what their needs are firsthand.
Yeah, and it's not just for show. This is like a key part of how he governs.
Right.
By being so approachable, he builds a strong sense of trust and makes people feel like their leader is legitimate.
So it's not just symbolic, there's real action behind it.
Right. Like there are instances where his direct conversations with people in these communities have actually led to policy changes.
Wow.
So it creates this very tangible link between the leadership and the everyday lives of the people.
I see. So it's really walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yeah, exactly.
That actually leads perfectly into something else Bhutan is known for, which is this whole idea of gross national happiness, or GNH.
Yes.
I mean, you're probably already super familiar with this, but for our listeners who might not be, it's basically a way of measuring a nation's progress that looks at the well-being of the people in a much broader sense, not just how much money the country's making.
Yeah, it's really holistic.
So how has King Jigme Khesar been involved in promoting this?
Under his leadership, GNH has stayed right at the center of how Bhutan plans its development.
Okay.
What I find really interesting is that they're willing to make conscious trade-offs.
What do you mean?
Like, sometimes they'll choose to protect the environment or preserve their culture, even if it means they might not make as much money.
Interesting.
So it really shows how deeply committed they are to their values, even as they modernize.
So it's not modernization at all costs.
No, it's very much about balance.
It's about finding that sweet spot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of putting people first and sticking to your values, we saw a really powerful example of this during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely.
Bhutan's response was incredible. Very few people lost their lives there. You got everyone vaccinated.
Yeah, they were a model for the world.
Exactly. And the document really emphasizes how personally involved the king was in all of this.
He was very hands-on.
Yeah, he was right there on the front lines with the relief efforts, making sure that the vaccines were distributed fairly.
Absolutely, and that's such a clear demonstration of leadership that aligns with those GNH principles.
Right.
It showed that putting the well-being of the whole community first, even taking proactive steps like nationwide lockdowns when cases were still really low, can lead to amazing results.
It makes you think about how different things could have been in other places if that approach had been taken, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a powerful example.
Now, looking towards the future, it seems like a major focus is on the next generation, with a lot of initiatives geared toward empowering young people through things like education and entrepreneurship.
That's right.
Why is this emphasis on youth so important?
Well, making these kinds of forward-thinking investments in their young people is absolutely crucial for Bhutan's stability and progress over the long term. By giving young people the skills and opportunities they need to contribute to building their nation, King Jigme Khesar is ensuring that Bhutan will have a really dynamic and engaged citizenry in the future.
So it's about setting them up for success, basically.
Exactly. It's about empowering the next generation.
And finally, the document touches on how Bhutan has been carefully navigating its relationships with other countries,
Right.
especially with India.
Yes.
It seems like they're working to maintain their sovereignty while also building strong ties with these partners.
It's a delicate balance.
It is, and that speaks to a very strategic way of handling things on the global stage.
Absolutely. For a smaller nation like Bhutan, that kind of careful balancing act is essential.
Right.
King Jigme Khesar's efforts to maintain these relationships are so important for their continued security and independence.
Yeah, because the geopolitical landscape is pretty complex these days.
It is. There are a lot of moving parts.
So to sum it all up, it seems like what we're seeing here is a leader who's really good at blending a modern vision for his country, like embracing democratic principles, empowering young people, but he's doing all of that while staying deeply committed to Bhutan's unique cultural heritage
Yeah.
and to the well-being of his people, which is really at the heart of that whole GNH philosophy.
Exactly. It's a compelling model of leadership that really prioritizes the flourishing of the entire nation in a world that's constantly changing.
Definitely food for thought, for sure.
Absolutely.
So here's something for all of you listening to think about.
Okay.
We've been talking about how King Jigme Khesar has made gross national happiness this guiding principle for Bhutan, right?
Yes.
So what about other nations?
Hmm.
Can you think of any other countries that have a similar kind of overarching philosophy that really shapes how they approach their own development?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What core values do they prioritize? What are their big goals? And then think about it. What are some of the strengths and maybe even the potential weaknesses of those different approaches to achieving national well-being?
It's like comparing different recipes for success.
It is. It's a really fascinating exercise in contrasting how different nations see their own path to a better future.
It really makes you think about what matters most.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It was great to be here.
Appreciate your insights.
Anytime.
All right, see you later.
Take care.